The federal court has dismissed a legal challenge launched by environmentalists to that forestry agreement between the New South Wales and Commonwealth Government. Someone who does not like what happened in court today is the independent MP, federal MP, former Keller, Dr. Sophie Scomps. Dr. Scomps, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
What is your reaction to this decision?
Well, I guess just listening into that conversation, I think it's really important to sort of note that the timber industry is a really important industry in Australia, and of course we need the really valuable products that timber provides, but we have to be clear that there's two divisions of the timber industry in Australia, and one is plantation, which in New South Wales makes up 90% of timber that is provided, and then there's the native forest logging, which makes up about 10% of forestry in this state, in New South Wales. So it's good to make that distinction. And now the other thing is that the native forest division is uneconomic. It's loss-making. In the last year, it lost $15 million. In the year prior to that, it lost $9 million. And in 2021, it lost $20 million. So it's uneconomic and it's not commercially viable. So that's the number one thing to consider. And also, I heard you say that, yes, we do absolutely need timber for really vital things like building our houses. But we have to be clear that most of the wood that we use, or the timber that we use to make the frames of our houses, comes from pine plantation. So that's the softwood, the plantation division of the forestry industry. So that's really important to clarify as well. So when we're talking about this decision that was handed down today, it was really just looking at the native forest logging industry. And we look at now the context that we have in 2023 is very different from the context or the circumstances in 1997 when these decisions were made. And now we're facing a climate crisis, we're facing an environmental crisis, and we're also facing an extinction crisis. So when we're looking at these decisions, we need to take this into consideration. And I think what the move is that now we've got this uneconomic industry of native forest logging, and we're looking at how it's damaging our future and looking for ways that we can really keep the timber industry viable and vibrant and the communities vibrant. And that really means moving fully towards plantation timber so that we do have a strong industry in this country and in this state.
Wendy from the North Coast texts in and says, there are 2 million hectares of state forests in New South Wales, half of which is never logged. There are more than 7.6 million hectares of national parks in New South Wales, almost 4 times as much as state forests and 8 times the area potentially logged. So there is a lot of forest. I think a lot of people would think, well, we don't want any of it to be logged. And in an ideal world, of course, that's always what most people would think. But we need timber from some places, and this is, the judge said, and I'd like your comment on this, Dr. Sophie Scomps, she said it was essentially a political decision. This is not for the court. So was this a waste of time and money to take this to court when the judge even said, look, work it out yourself politically?
Look, I think I can comment on whether it was a waste of time. I definitely think it's something that needs to be explored because the context, as I said, now in 2023 is very different from when the decisions were made in 1997. But it does shine a bit more of a spotlight on what's happening in this country when it comes to native forest logging. So as I said, it's uneconomic now, it's losing money, and what's happening is taxpayers are having to subsidise this loss-making enterprise. So really what we're doing is the taxpayer is subsidising the destruction of our native forests and subsidising further extinctions of our animals. So in 2021, the koala was deemed threatened, so much so that by 2050 it was projected that it will be extinct in the wild. So I think that's something that, we now need to come to terms with. We also have many other threatened species. So we need to look at conserving these very precious, high-value native forests so that we do have this vibrant as well native species so that they are there for future generations for us to enjoy. And I think all Australians really value our native species and want to see them persist. So that's one thing also that we need to consider, as well as how we maintain a vibrant timber industry into the future.
Speaking of wasting money, the North East Forest Alliance was given a $10 million grant from the Environment Department, which presumably some of that may have been spent on this court case against the federal government.
Look, it may have. I don't know the details of that. What I do know is Frontier Economics found that nearly $250 million of taxpayer subsidies was given to the native forest logging division, and still it's making a loss. So we really have to, question, is this a common sense way to use it, or should we be using that money to transition to a much more viable and sustainable industry into the future? Because we do need to absolutely make sure that these timber communities, these people who are working these jobs long term have an opportunity into the future, and that these communities remain vibrant and viable into the future. Nobody wants to see people at a loss if this industry suddenly falls in a heap and there's not the planning and there's not the generous investment to transition people away from what is essentially a loss-making industry.
There are many texts coming in on this, Dr. Scoms. These ones, for example, the hardwood industry is not uneconomic. It only lost money post-fire and flood, where someone else says the hardwood division made a profit. Don't let facts get in the way.
Well, can I just respond to that? Is that New South Wales Forestry Corps, in its own report last year, reports that it made a $15 million loss. So, yeah.
Also, people saying, look, it's mostly pine that is used in building houses, not hardwood, but of course hardwood is still used in floors and all sorts of things like that, and steel framing as well. So there's many, many texts. I can't read them all out, but I do appreciate
No, that's exactly right. And also the other issue is that we're having new products come on board. We have engineered timber as well, which has been used for those final finishes, such as our floors and our kitchen benches. And the other thing I'd say is that native forests are often used, and this is what's really challenging when you think about it. One, it's loss-making. Two, there's environmental devastation, but also often native wood logging is used for really low-value products such as wood chips, such as pulp for paper, tomato stakes and pallets. And so when you consider the really incredible value of the trees when they're living and they're hosting these vibrant native species compared to having wood chips or tomato stakes, it really is quite confronting to consider that. The other thing is about plantations is you get really high-quality, beautiful straight timbers, which is what we use for our electricity poles. We don't use native wood for that. Usually it's typically coming from from plantation timber. So there is a benefit from plantation timber as well, and at the same time, we then get to conserve these really beautiful native forests that we have that are home to our native species.
Okay, one last text that is directed at you specifically. How many of Dr. Scomps's constituents work in the timber industry in the affluent seat of Mackellar? None, I'm prepared to guess. Maybe ask the local members, says David. Why are you so interested in this? Because after all, I need to answer for you, but you do make decisions on behalf of the nation, not just your own electorate.
Well, that's exactly right. I'm a federal MP, and so federal decisions like this are really important. But I would say the people of Mackellar, it's really, the protection of our environment is one of the most important issues to the people of Mackellar. When we did that listening process prior to the last election, looking after our environment came number two behind action on climate change. So it's right up there. And this is highly supported in my electorate of Mackellar. People want to see our native species, our koalas, our greater gliders, our birds. We want them all protected. These species belong to all Australians, not just timber communities. But at the same time, we need a fair and just and generous transition. Nobody wants to see the timber communities penalised for a lack of planning and a lack of investment. So I think we need to be generous and hopeful for the future as well, because there are still jobs when we think about plantation, when we think about transitioning to tourism and recreation for these areas and carbon sequestration. And also we've got to think about improved water quality that these forests provide as well.
All right, there's so much more that I'm sure we'll talk about at a later date. Dr. Sophie Scomps, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
And don't forget, of course, the people in those electorates get to vote every 3 or 4 years, and they can certainly either support or disagree with the government and court decisions. This is Drive on ABC Radio. You're with Rod Quinn across New South Wales.